Jewish audio on Chabad.org.
So in the early 1970s, the premier of the Soviet Union, Premier Brezhnev, announces to the Politburo that he is making a state visit to Poland, and that in honor of the trip, he wishes to bring the Polish people a momentous gift. What should he bring? So it is decided that Brezhnev should bring a large painting entitled Lenin in Poland. After all, what could be a more meaningful expression of Soviet-Polish solidarity than the portrait of Stalin, of Lenin, the god of Soviet communism, visiting Poland? Unfortunately, Lenin never visited Poland, and so the artist had nothing to work with and couldn't come up with a painting depicting Lenin in Poland that would satisfy Brezhnev. Every artist that they would commission would try something, and Brezhnev would say, this is not good enough. And of course, the artists would complain that if they had something to view, they would be able to pull it off. Time is running short, and the Soviet leadership is growing desperate. Finally, it is decided, okay, we're going to ask Rabinowitz. Rabinowitz, the artist, the dissident artist. They call in Rabinowitz and they say, look, Rabinowitz, we know you have voiced many complaints against your country. However, we're here to offer you a deal. If you perform this service for the motherland, we promise you a large apartment and a lot of work. So get over all your problems with the communist regime, make the painting for us, and we'll deal kindly with you. The Rabinowitz, who had been tortured and sent into exile by this same government and now sought his help, says, okay, I'll do it for you. Lenin in Poland, no problem. 3 weeks later, the day before the trip, Brezhnev leads a delegation of the Politburo members into a conference room, and there stands Rabinowitz with a large canvas covered with a drop cloth. Brezhnev says, let's see the painting. Rabinowitz removes the covering, and everyone in the room gasps. The painting is a painting of a man and a woman being quite intimate with each other. Who's the man? Brezhnev says to Rabinowitz. He says, that man, that's Leon Trotsky. Leon Trotsky. Who's the woman? The woman, that's Kropyuska, Lenin's wife. Where's Lenin, Brezhnev says? Lenin's in Poland. The Jew always managed to get their revenge somehow. You can put us down, communists, but we will always have the last laugh. The joy and oi of Judaism. In the Torah reading a few weeks ago, we read about the miraculous birth of our forefather Isaac. And then we learned how his father Abraham was called upon by God to offer his son Isaac as a sacrifice. You know the rest of the story. You know he actually doesn't offer him as a sacrifice. He's brought up as a sacrifice, but God stops him before he actually slaughters his son. And he sees a ram caught in the thickets by its horns, and he's told to replace his son with this ram. And because that horn was caught in the bushes, that is why we blow the shofar on Rosh Hashanah, to remind us of the dedication that our Zaydi Avram had, and for his willingness to sacrifice everything for the sake of God Almighty. It's a heavy story, the binding of Isaac. Indeed, we know that Isaac himself was a very serious fellow. But it's interesting that if you know the meaning of the name Isaac, it's the very opposite of the personality. Isaac itself comes from the word Yitzchak, and Yitzchak means laughter, to laugh. In fact, the shofar which we blow on Rosh Hashanah reminds us of the crying. It has the sound of tears, of crying, to remind us of our commitment to want to get back to God, and our longing to be back to God, and our sadness perhaps over the mistakes that we have made in life. But at the same time, if you listen closely to the shofar, you can also detect laughing going on. Yitzchak, serious. Yitzchak meaning laughter. Shofar, crying. Shofar at the same time laughing. You know, sometimes when you hear somebody and they're hysterical and you're not sure, are they crying or are they laughing? Because there's a very fine line. And at times you're not exactly sure. Is everything okay? Yeah, I'm laughing. Oh, I was worried. I thought you were crying. So I suggest to you that that same sound of the shofar, the cry and the laugh all at once, it's representing the sorrow and the joy together. Fear and reassurance. Pain and relief. Laughter and tears. Or as we called it for tonight, joy and oi. All at the same time. King David writes in the book of Psalms, Gilu birada, we rejoice with trembling. There is a certain element of that we rejoice while at the same time we're trembling. Now it sounds like a contradiction in terms, but I think that, my friends, is what being Jewish is all about. We rejoice with trembling. We rejoice in our tears and we weep in our joy. And tonight we'll explain how that's possible and what that means, both historically and from each of us in our own personal perspectives on life. There was once a chassid who had a yechidus, a private audience, with Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Leidi, the first Chabad Rebbe. Yechidus is an awesome experience. You step up to the Rebbe's desk. His face is all aglow with a certain radiance and intensity. And his focus is completely on you. You hand the Rebbe what was called a kvittel. A kvittel is a note in which you essentially write to the Rebbe the issues you'd like the Rebbe to address in this private audience. So that which is on your mind, or perhaps that which was weighing heavy in your life at that time, you would write on this note. You would hand it to the Rebbe would read the note, and then begin the audience knowing the subjects you would like to touch. So this particular chassid of the Alter Rebbe hands in his kvittel, and this particular kvittel read like a laundry list of all the different things he'd like to have the Rebbe bless him with. He would like success in this venture, success in that venture, and he wants good health and a nice home and money in the bank and nachas from the kids. He had this long list. Rabbi Shneur Zalman studies the kvittel, looks up at the chassid, and he says, I see that you have given quite some thought to what you need, which is good. My question is, have you also given that much thought to where you are needed? I see you're paying quite good attention to the things you need. Are you paying equal attention to where you are needed? To why, to how, to where you are needed here on God's earth. The chassid, after this yechidus was over, walked out trembling with fear and dancing with joy at the same time. Because on the one hand, the Rebbe was sort of admonishing him for perhaps getting a bit too carried away with his own materialistic needs. But on the other hand, the Rebbe was lifting him to the highest of heights, inspiring him, telling him clearly, hey, look, you're needed. Your life has great meaning and purpose. God has a need for you. And this lifted his spirits beyond measure, even as he trembled in humility and awe. Celebrate life and be in awe. Rejoice with trembling, for within the trembling lies the greatest heights of the joy. There was a newlywed couple taking their honeymoon in Lake Tahoe. They got out, they went fishing, and somehow, accidentally, the bride's diamond ring slipped off her finger and fell into the water. The good husband, the newlywed, jumps into the water to try to save his wife's diamond ring, and as much as he can try to look and swim everywhere, to no avail. They were shattered. They were saddened on their own honeymoon to lose a diamond ring. Months went by. They didn't have the money to buy a new ring right away, and so the sadness continued for some time. But life goes on. On their 10th wedding anniversary, the husband says to the wife, our anniversary 10 years ago was a bit ruined. So why don't we go back? Same hotel, same place. Let's go back to Lake Tahoe. Let's relive the honeymoon that was taken from us because of the loss of the ring. The wife says it's a great idea. They go back to Lake Tahoe, and they go fishing. And they catch a large fish. They take it back to their hotel room. They clean it up. They make a little barbecue outside their hotel. The husband bites into a fish, and he begins to choke on something. She pounds on his back. She performs the Heimlich maneuver, and he coughs it up. And what do you think he has there? A bone. You see, you wanted me to say ring. You felt the story was leading you on. Of course, it's one of those fairy tale ring stories where 10 years later, sure, the fish happens to still be there 10 years later in Lake Tahoe. You see, we always expect the fairy tale ending. We want the fairy tale ending, just like in the movies. And if things don't turn out just the way we want them to, we're shattered, we're dejected, we feel cheated. But it really ought not to be that way. We must be able to find happiness, real happiness, deep and meaningful happiness, even without the fairy tale. Even without the diamond ring being coughed up. Even if it was just a bone. As long as he's alive. You know that expression, life is what happens to you while you're busy making other plans? We have to adjust to the shift, adjust to the tears at times, adjust to the disappointment, and discover how to rejoice, even there as well. Success in life is not always about victories, but it's about perseverance. The great man or woman is not he or she who triumphs, it's rather he or she who never quits, who finds joy amidst the struggle. A mountain climber can feel fatigued, and as he climbs the mountain, he may sometimes feel that he has no energy to go any higher. He may feel that the mountain has defeated him, that he is beat. And it is perfectly justified then to stop for a period of time to rest, to regain your strength, to think through the next step. But what he cannot do is let go, because that would lead to his immediate fall and destruction. Life can be an uphill struggle. And as we climb the ladder of life, we sometimes feel like we have no more inspiration or desire to carry the task forward. At that time, you have to remember that you've been down here before. You've been demoralized before. You felt defeated before. But the fact that you're still here means that you were able to pick up the pieces before, and we're going to be able to pick up the pieces again. We have to remember that those previous emotions is proof enough that we eventually do triumph. In the final analysis, life is not about conquering the mountain. Our mountain of life stretches on endlessly. You see, in our life, there is no summit. There's no hilltop from which you can scream, "Victory, I have made it." For our mountain climb continues each and every single day. Every day of life is part of the climb. The challenge is not to reach the summit. The challenge is to enjoy the climb. Life may not be easy, but my friends, life is good. Life is a blessing. And it is because of that goodness that we become enamored with life. And the thought of losing it, God forbid, is very upsetting to us. You know the story, there was once this poor Jew from the shtetl who was having heart problems. So he went to see this world-famous heart specialist in Vienna. The doctor treats him, prescribes the necessary medication. At the end of the treatment, the doctor hands him a bill for 50 rubles. The Jew looks at it and says, 50 rubles? I don't have 50 rubles. So the doctor says, okay, in your case, I'll slash my fee. 40 rubles for you. 40 rubles? I don't have 40 rubles. It's too much. The doctor starts losing his patience. He says, okay, we'll call it for 30, and that's it. I don't have 30 rubles. And he keeps bargaining down. The doctor says 10 rubles. And so it continues on and on until they reach a settlement on 2 rubles. The doctor takes the 2 rubles, and as the Yidel, this poor Jew, is about to walk out the door, the doctor says, stop 1 minute. I have a question for you. If you knew you didn't have money, why did you look for the world specialist? I mean, you knew I was more expensive than your little doctor in your shtetl town. You traveled to Vienna to go to the world-famous specialist, and you don't have the money. I don't understand. Why did you come here? And the man says, listen, doctor, when it comes to my health, nothing is too expensive. So as difficult as life may sometimes be, we cling to it, and we cherish it, and we want the best, because instinctively, deep inside, there is something telling us life is good. And that feeling comes from the sense that life has purpose. Your birth was no accident, no matter what your parents may have told you. God engineered your birth because your life is as important, as meaningful, and as necessary to Him as is the entire universe. As important as God's creation of this entire world, of all of history, is as important as you playing your role to God Almighty. Lefichach nivra ha'olam yechidi. The reason God created man singularly, when we look at the portion of Genesis, God creates many animals. He creates more than one of everything that He creates, but the human being He creates as one. To show us one man equals the whole world. Every individual is unique. No 2 people are alike, and your soul was hand-picked, hand-chosen by God to fulfill a specific mission. A mission which only you can perform, and that mission can perfect the world. What is your world? It's whatever you wake up in the morning to. That's your world. That's your life. Your family, your community, your personality, and yes, even your tsaros, your difficulties, your circumstances. That's the life you were put into. And that's where your purpose can be found. So we don't, as Jews, sit around saying all the time, if only. If only my kids were as well behaved as those. If only my mother wouldn't have married my father. If only we didn't have that bad year in the stock market. If only I knew where to invest. If only we can keep going down the routes of if onlys. If only is a total waste of time and energy. Because you are who you are. Your life is what it is because that's what it's meant to be. Now perfect the life that you have. Not someone else's life. Not in dreamland. Not in fairy tale land. Not what if I could have been. If you were you, how do you make it any better? As they say, the key to living a good and happy life is to have the courage to change those things which can be changed for the better. To have the serenity to accept those things which cannot be changed. And most important, to have the wisdom to know the difference. If there's something you can do to make things better, then by God, go ahead and do it. If there's nothing you can do about it, then let it go. Don't sit around worrying and aggravating and moping around things that are beyond your control. When we live with a sense of faith and a sense of higher purpose in life, when we understand that there's a bigger picture beyond what we see, when we live with the sense that after all is said and done, God runs the world, we find ourselves able to cope, able to move on, able to continue the climb. You know, a child takes his mother's hand and doesn't always know where the mom is taking him. But the child continues to go. I won't get into this whole elaborate discussion that I have in the subject of faith. But when a mother takes a child and takes them to the doctor, the child goes along. And when the child is taken into the doctor's room, the child goes along. And when the child sees the doctor coming in, the child begins to fetch and cry because the child remembers the last time I was here. That guy hurt me. He has this metal instrument and he sticks it inside me and it doesn't feel good. And the child sees the doctor coming in, and the child continues to cry while holding onto the mother's hand. The child has that look in the child's eyes, looking at the mother, saying, please help me. Get me away from this masked man. And then the doctor says to the mother, I'm going to need you to help me hold the baby down. And instead of the mother helping the baby, the mother seems to be in on it with the doctor. And in the words of Shakespeare, et tu brute, you're in on it. And the baby is crying not just of the pain of the needle of the immunization, but of sensing that the mother has turned on her own child. And the baby is saying, Mommy, every day you tell me you love me. Every day you kiss me 1,000 times. Why are you taking me here? But the moment that immunization is over, what does the child want more than anything else? The embrace of the mother. The same woman that held him down, he wants that embrace. And that child later on in the day will continue holding Mommy's hand and go where Mommy takes him. That's our relationship with God. So long as we believe that God is holding our hand, we can go anywhere. We can survive any struggle if we truly believe that God is with us, that God is holding our hand. Then I'm fine. Then I'm okay. After all, God is my Father. Life is all about contrast. When you know how to deal with the darkness, then and only then do you truly know how to celebrate the light. And perhaps it is true that nobody knows how to cry quite the way a Jew knows how to cry. But I would say this, that no one knows quite how to dance the way a Jew knows how to dance. Because with the Jews' trust and faith, with our lifestyle, a Jew is able to lift themselves up from the floor and laugh. We're able to leap. We're able to jump higher and closer to heaven. Even with the baggage of tears that we have carried with us throughout our history, we haven't forgotten how to laugh and how to dance. There was a barber that I used to go to in Encino. I went to him for 20 years until he recently retired. Every time I would go get my hair cut, I would notice the numbers on his arm. He often spoke about his horrific experiences in the concentration camps. How he saved himself by having to cut the hair of the officers of the SS and the Gestapo, the very animals who murdered his parents and his brothers and sisters and friends. He was a very sweet man, a very special man. Anyway, there was this period of a good few weeks in which I was trying to call, and there was no answer. Leon wasn't picking up the phone. I was worried maybe he's not well, maybe something's wrong. I was starting to look like Samson because he was the only guy I would go to. Anyway, finally, after weeks and weeks of trying, finally Leon picks up the phone. He was back. I came in for my haircut, and Leon greets me with a big smile. I sit down in the chair, and he says, Rabbi, I went. Will you believe it? I finally went. Where did you go, Leon? I went to Israel. For the first time in my life, I visited Israel. And then he tells me this. He says, you know something, Rabbi? I was there for 3 weeks. And for 3 weeks straight, I couldn't stop crying. That's all I did all day was I cried. I never cried so much in my life. I got off the plane, I saw a sign in Hebrew. I started to cry. I saw Israeli soldiers, Jewish soldiers, carrying rifles, protecting our homeland. I cried. I went to the Kotel, to the Western Wall. I cried. I saw an Israeli flag outside a museum. I cried. Wherever I went, I couldn't stop myself from crying. 3 weeks straight of crying. And of course, hearing this man tell me about this experience, I knew that this man was crying and laughing at the same time. That within those tears there was tremendous joy. After everything that he'd been through in his life, he's standing there and saying, look, history, Look, nations of the world, look where I am standing today. I am in Yerushalayim, I'm in Jerusalem. After have gone through a Holocaust, standing now in Jerusalem, laughing and crying. That's the Jewish people, being able to look at the bigger picture of history. We have a remarkable condition. It's called spiritual schizophrenia. That we have the ability to cry and laugh at the same time. We can rejoice and tremble all at once. It's an incredible, awesome, overwhelming phenomenon. Who else has this but the Jew? Some of you may have read this. A number of years ago, the Polish government held an event which they celebrated the 85th anniversary of the Polish Air Force. Now, I know you think a joke is coming. Okay, this is not a Polish joke. It's true. They wanted to celebrate the 85th anniversary of the Polish Air Force. So they were hosting this event, and they invited many countries, Israel among them, to send contingents of their Air Force jets to participate in the festivities. So their way of celebrating the anniversary is that all these countries would bring airplanes of their Air Force. Israel responded to the invitation as follows. We would like to participate, and we will send our Air Force F-15s on one condition. Our F-15s would like to fly over the Auschwitz concentration camp. Upon hearing this, the curators of the Auschwitz Museum objected. And they said, no, we don't want noise here. It's a very quiet, solemn place. And the sound of an airplane, the screeching noises of a military aircraft over Auschwitz, they said, is totally inappropriate, disrespectful, irrelevant. It's a disturbance of the peace, and we don't want it here. Interesting that the Polish government is going to tell Israel what's the proper way of respecting this solemn place. Anyway, the Israelis hung tough in their position, and ultimately the Poles relented. And on that incredible day, a contingent of Israeli F-15 jets, each of them piloted by children or grandchildren of Auschwitz survivors, took off towards this sacred and sorrowful resting place of their parents and grandparents. In the cockpits, the crew members carried with them the names of all those recorded murdered in Auschwitz 60 years earlier. The jets, proudly displaying the Blue Star of David, flew towards the concentration camp as slowly as possible, following the railroad tracks that led to the camp. And then as soon as they reached the camp, they peeled away with a loud roar and a mighty screech. It was not a quiet tribute to the millions who perished, nor was it meant to be. In the words of the Israeli ambassador to Poland, Shevach Weiss, who responded to what was then called the indignation and the condemnation of those who were seeking to preserve the silence of Auschwitz, he said, this quiet had to be disturbed. And it had to be disturbed by the screech of an Israeli F-15 jet. That was our response. I am sure that as they flew over the graves and ashes of their parents and their grandparents, I am certain every pilot cried bitter tears. And amidst the tears, they laughed a roaring laugh. For Am Yisrael Chai. As much as we have lost, we're still here. Do you know that during the Holocaust, hundreds of thousands of Jews danced out loud and sang as they were led to the gas chambers? They refused to give the Nazis the final victory. So even as they were being led to gas chambers, they found it within themselves to dance and to sing. Ani ma'amin be'emunah shalema, I believe. They believed that they would, as a Jewish people, somehow survive this. Amidst the tears, they found the strength to dance. Netzach Yisrael, the eternity of Israel, is unshakable. Because we don't view our lives, we don't view our history, we don't view our destiny as specific snapshots in time. If we were to only look at one picture, we would be puzzled and we would be depressed. But we understand that life is not made up of one snapshot. But we see it as something far bigger and far greater than the moment at hand. Our eternal flame burns bright and cannot and will not ever be extinguished. See, the history of the world is like a large jigsaw puzzle. And if you just look at a single piece of a puzzle, you don't understand the piece. The image on it makes no sense at all. The shape of it appears to be nothing. It just doesn't work in your mind. In fact, it could be a quite ugly piece. But if you are a Jew of faith, you realize that the piece that you're looking at is just that. It's a piece. And you're an essential part of putting the pieces together so that ultimately the beautiful panoramic picture can eventually emerge. Even in our darkest days, Im Eshkachech Yerushalayim, we never forgot thee, O Jerusalem. And it's because we never forgot Jerusalem, that's why we're back in Jerusalem. It's because we never let go of our hopes, of our dreams, of our faith, that we are a people capable of dancing our way to physical gas chambers, and yet the very next day we can rise like a phoenix out of the ashes of a Holocaust and reclaim our homeland as our own. It's because we have that unique ability amidst the tears to still find Yitzchak, the laughter, laughing at the face of history. Golda Meir tells in her memoirs what it was like to be at the Western Wall on the day it was liberated. It was the third day of the Six-Day War, Wednesday, June the 7th. Although she was not prime minister at the time, she said that she needed to be there. She writes that uniformed paratroopers wrapped in prayer shawls clung so tightly to the wall that it seemed impossible to separate them from it. They and the wall were like one. Only a few hours earlier, they had fought furiously for the liberation of Jerusalem. They had seen their comrades fall for its sake. And now they were standing before the wall, wrapped in their tallis. They were crying. And she writes, as I stood there in awe, one of the soldiers, having no idea who I was, put his arms around me, lay his head on my shoulder, and we cried together, and we rejoiced together. This was the most moving moment of my entire life. We rejoice with trembling. Even as we laugh, we cry, and even as we cry, we laugh. In 1991, during the Gulf War, you may have seen this picture, the Israeli Philharmonic Orchestra played a concert wearing gas masks as Scud missiles were fired by Saddam Hussein on Tel Aviv. They wouldn't stop the music. We'll continue playing on, even if we have to wear these gas masks, we'll play on. We rejoice. Though we tremble, we rejoice. We have this super rational defiance and resiliency. We laugh in the face of all of them who would seek to bring us down. The powerful communist Soviet Union declared war against the Jew. So many were sent to slave labor, yet the Jew stood strong. The Soviet Empire is no more, and Judaism flourishes all across Eastern Europe. Yitzchak, the laughter of the Jew. The Talmud tells us that four of our holy sages, Rabbi Gamliel, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Rabbi Yeshua, and Rabbi Akiva, shortly after the destruction of the Second Holy Temple, they were walking together amongst the ruins of Jerusalem. They were making their way. They have heard, they knew that the temple was destroyed, and they're making their way now to see the ruins. They see the destruction all over Jerusalem, and they could not believe their eyes. They make their way to the Temple Mount, and they see the burnt destruction of the Holy Temple. And then to add insult to injury at that moment, a fox came crawling out from under the rubble, right at the very spot where the Holy of Holies once stood. That sight of desecration was just too much to bear. So the Talmud says, Rabbi Gamliel, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Rabbi Yeshua began sobbing and weeping uncontrollably. They are witnessing, they see the destruction of Jerusalem and the destruction of the Holy Temple. But the Talmud says, Rabbi Akiva mitzachek. Rabbi Akiva broke out in laughter. So his colleagues turned to him in shock and explained, Akiva, how can you laugh at a time like this? You see the destruction. How could you laugh? Do you not see what we're seeing? Have you completely lost your mind? There's nothing joyous here. There's nothing humorous here. To which Rabbi Akiva responded, why are you crying? What do you mean why we're crying? It's obvious why we're crying. We're crying because the desecration reached so low that shu'alim hilchuvo, foxes, are roaming where our Holy of Holies once stood. So Rabbi Akiva said, aha, that's exactly why I laugh. I laugh because you see everything that we're witnessing right now, this was all prophesied to us years ago. We were told that this was going to happen. And in fact, so detailed were the prophecies told to us about this day that they said, Al Har Tzion Sheshamim Shu'alim Hilchuvo, that there will be such a desecration that foxes will roam in the rubble on that Temple Mount. Now that I see with my own eyes the fulfillment of the prophecies of our prophets coming true to the very word, now I know the rest of the prophecy is also true to the exact word. The prophets that talk about the rebuilding of Israel, the prophets that talk about the rebuilding of Jerusalem, the prophecies that talk about the ingathering of Jews from all over the world, the prophecies that talk about the eternity of the Jewish people, the prophecies that talk about a messianic time, they're true. They're real. We can't deny it because we see the prophecies coming true before our very eyes right here. That's why I laugh. Of course, deep inside I cry for the destruction, but amidst the tears I also see the future. That's why I laugh. Last week, if you recall, those that were here, I spoke about the trip that we took, a group tour to Israel. On one of these group trips on the Shabbos, we took a walking tour of the old city. On Shabbos afternoon, many people in the old city of Jerusalem are out walking. The elderly are sitting on benches talking. For those of you familiar with the Ir HaAtika, with the old city, you may remember that there's a place on the street that's called Chabad Street, right near the Cardo. And you can see where the archaeologists have dug down, and they have found ancient ground, some 50 feet from current street level. And you see this wide open area, which used to be the original Cardo, the original marketplace. You're actually able to see stone from the period of time of the Roman destruction of the temple. And they've unearthed these huge columns, if you're remembering that particular part of your tour, there's these huge columns that they have uncovered. Now, when we took this tour during the week, the gates to this street level, ancient street level, are closed. You can only look down 50 feet and see what the archaeologists have uncovered. But on Shabbat afternoon, to my surprise, when we looked down at the very spot that we looked a few days earlier on our tour, we saw children playing below. I said, hey, how'd they get there? They couldn't have jumped down. So the tour guide said, no, on Shabbat afternoon they open the gates, and children from all over Jerusalem, they come together and they play down below. That's the tradition. I'm taken in this scene, and suddenly I feel overwhelmed by the sight. Not just because it was nice to see Jews in Jerusalem on a bench talking and walking on a Shabbos afternoon. Not just because it was precious to see children playing together. I was overwhelmed because I was reminded of a verse in Zechariah. Chapter 8. A prophecy recorded thousands of years ago. I quote to you, so says the Lord, I will return to Zion, and I will dwell in the midst of Jerusalem. Old men and women shall yet sit in the streets of Jerusalem, and the streets of the city shall be filled with boys and girls playing in the streets. I stared out. Look, I said to my group, take a good look, because you are staring at the greatest sight any Jew could have witnessed for thousands of years. And I said, what do you mean? We just see some kids playing. I said, no, you don't understand. You're seeing an historical event. A people that leaves a country, that's thrown out of a country, does not come back. The only exception has been Israel. A people separated from their country for thousands of years don't retain any connection to that country. The only exception of the history of the world is Israel. Our prophets told us we will return. Who would have believed that 1,000 years ago? Who would have believed that 500 years ago? Who would have believed that 250 years ago? You're looking around at what Zechariah said would one day be. Now, we're not there yet. We're not home free yet. There's still more of this prophecy that needs to come true. The Messiah hasn't come yet, but we are able to see, by reading the words of the prophets, we're able to see the excitement of what's to come. Children will yet dance on the cobblestones of Jerusalem, Zechariah said. Zechariah saw these children. Zechariah saw young couples, and he saw the elderly, and he saw the rebirth, and he saw the miracle. And so he laughed. And he instilled faith within us that gave us the strength throughout our history to look exile in the face and still laugh. Rabbi Akiva mitzachek, Rabbi Akiva laughed. He laughed because he knew that what the prophets visualized and described was not a hallucination. It was not a fantasy, that it was real. We laugh along with Rabbi Akiva. We laugh because our generations have been filled with events that Isaiah and Jeremiah and Elijah and all of our great prophets could only dream about in prophetic words. We are envisioning with our very eyes in our lifetime, now, today. And so we laugh. For generations, our ancestors prayed, perhaps more in hope than in expectation. Sound the great shofar for our freedom. Raise the signal to gather our exiles and gather us together from the four corners of the earth. We dreamed of a day where Jews that were in different parts of the world would be able to come back together as one. In 1949, Israel airlifted 50,000 Jews from Yemen. Most of those that were airlifted never saw an airplane in their lives. When the prophet spoke about Jews from all corners of the world being brought home on the wings of eagles, what do you think he was talking about? When he saw a vision where Jews from different parts of the world were going to be put onto an airplane and taken from different parts of the world and brought to their homeland, and he wanted to describe this scene 2,000 years ago, what way would you describe this? Wings of eagles. And then in 1950, 120,000 Jews from Iraq, airlifted, brought home to Israel. Country after country after country, airlifts of Jews, different parts of the world, exiled, living in fear, Israeli planes coming into their country, airlifting them, sometimes in the middle of the night, sometimes in haste. And then in 1990, the Soviet curtain falls. Over 1 million Jews from the old Soviet empire brought to their homeland. 1 million people. It has never happened in the history of the world. An airlift of 1 million people. They needed food. They needed jobs. They needed a home. They needed money. They needed clothing. An airlift the size of 1/6 of your country. Could you imagine taking in to our country 1/6 the present size of our country? We tumult today about immigration. Could you imagine adding 1/6 of the entire size of the country. That's what Israel faced. What did Israel do? They celebrated the opportunity. They danced at the airport as airplane after airplane after airplane, sometimes minutes apart, were landing from the old Soviet Empire. So laugh. My dear friends, we have arrived at the period of our history where we laugh. Remember, in the weeks before we left on our mission to Israel, we collected thousands of letters from students from throughout Southern California. And they were writing letters to the soldiers of the IDF. So we had, through all the schools, we said, if anyone wants to send a letter to a soldier, write the letter and give it to us and we'll bring it to them. Little did we know how literally every class of every day school in Southern California would participate in this, and we were going now with thousands of letters. Well, how do you distribute thousands of letters to the IDF? You can simply drop it off by a military office and ask them to distribute, but we didn't feel that would do justice. These kids worked hard, and we wanted to put it in the hand of a soldier. So I'll tell you a secret that I found out. In order, when the Israeli soldier goes through training, one of the things that they must do, they must visit Yad Vashem. Every Israeli soldier has to take a tour of the Holocaust Museum in Jerusalem. It's part of their training. It's part of their understanding of why it is that they're willing to put their lives on the line. Those tours of soldiers take place early Sunday morning. So if you go early Sunday morning to Yad Vashem, there's going to be thousands of Israeli soldiers there. So we clearly, obviously, scheduled our trip to Yad Vashem for early Sunday morning. And then our group was there right away, just handing out letters. At first, the battalion leaders are saying, hey, what are you guys doing? And we explained to them, and they said, go ahead. And we were able to distribute all these letters. As we walked through the museum, every exhibit, we were surrounded by Israeli soldiers. Exhibit by exhibit. Very painful exhibits. You can't walk through this museum without being emotionally affected, overtaken by grief, by the horror, by the silence of the world. And as we moved slowly and quietly from one room to the next, we all realized, without having to express this in any words to one another, that here, in the midst of our grief, in the midst of our pain, in the midst of our tears, was our response to the world. It was all around us in each of these rooms. Never again, because of these young men and women. Never again, Am Yisrael Chai. Never again, it's time to wipe away our tears. Never again, it's time to rejoice. One of the great Hasidim of the past century was a man named Rabbi Mendel Futefas. He was a very kind and saintly man who always walked around with a smile on his face. Now, for 14 years, Rav Mendel was held in Soviet prisons and labor camps for his crime of teaching Torah to Jewish children. 14 years of his life, Soviet labor camp. Within the gulags, he would spend most of his free time studying and praying, but he also spent a good deal of his time interacting with his fellow inmates, some Jews and non-Jews. They all came to love Reb Mendel. Everyone there. Among those in prison with Reb Mendel was this circus performer whose claim to fame was the incredible skill as a tightrope walker. Reb Mendel would often engage this fellow in conversation, and he was totally baffled and intrigued by this art of tightrope walking. He couldn't understand it. Why would a person risk their life to walk on a rope so high up? There were no nets in the Soviet circus. So literally, anytime he would take this walk on a tightrope, he would be risking his life. And this guy, he was saying, surely you have some tricks. You're connected to some wire. There's got to be, to risk your life every time you walk. And for his part, the performer maintained that he was not held by any cables. There was no trick. That for him, because of all of his training, it was not life-threatening. It was just an easy thing for him to do. One year, Several months before May Day, the guards told the prisoners that they're going to be allowed to set up a makeshift circus to celebrate that day in the labor camp. The tightrope walker was on cloud 9. This was his big day. So he coordinated with all the other acrobats that were in the camp. You'll do this, and you'll be the clown, and you'll do that. But of course, the highlight was going to be that there in this labor camp they had the Soviet famous tightrope walker. That was going to be the highlight. The performance date arrived. The tightrope walker made sure that Reb Mendel was in the audience. After all the acts were finished, the lights came down. The drum roll began. Everybody waited with bated breath. The tightrope walker climbed the tall pole to his rope. His first steps were a little bit tentative. He hadn't done this in years, but within a few seconds, it all came back to him. With his hands twirling about and waving to the crowd, he walks right across to the other end, makes a turn, reverses direction, proceeds back to the other side. He performs a number of stunts on his way. The crowd went wild, applauding, and he makes his way down. Immediately he runs to Reb Mendel. And he says, "Okay, Reb Mendel, now that you watched, tell me, did you learn anything? What's the trick?" Reb Mendel closes his eyes and he revisits the whole act. And he says, "It wasn't your hands, and it's not in the feet. It's in your eyes. It's the eyes. During the entire time, your eyes were completely focused and riveted on the opposite side. You never take your eyes off the other side." "Exactly," said the performer. "That's the trick. It's all in the eyes. When you see your destination in front of you and you don't take your eyes off it, your feet go where they need to go and you simply don't fall." Everything that Rav Mendel lived through in the gulags, he would use as a lesson for the rest of us. And he would tell over this story. And he would say to us, how do we walk the tightrope called life without stumbling? Without having to yell like the commercial, "I have fallen and I can't get up." It's by establishing proper goals and seeing to it that we remain focused like a laser beam on those goals. If we don't take our eyes off where we need to go, we will get there. And that's true whether it's in the macrocosm of our history or the microcosm of individual lives. When you know what your purpose is and where your destination lies, and you simply don't take your eyes off the goal, then you know where to put your feet. You know how and where to proceed when you wake up in the morning, and no matter what fears and distractions may arise along the way, so long as you keep that purpose in focus, you will not fall. The Torah, given to us by God Almighty, is our roadmap to a meaningful and fulfilling way of life. It sets the goals and it defines for us what our purpose as a Jewish people are. And when we live by it, we not only survive every day, but we thrive every day. When we come together with our children and with our families on Shabbat, and we observe it as a holy day, or we come to the synagogue together as a community, or instead of going out shopping, we find ourselves in prayer, we come to know that life has purpose. When we light the Shabbat candles, or we put on the tefillin, or we give charity, or we put a mezuzah up on our doorpost, or we do what we're doing right now, we come together and we study. We take classes because we want to understand our heritage a little more. When our children go to Hebrew schools or day schools, where they not only learn the ABC, but they learn the Jewish alphabet, so they can open a siddur, a prayer book, and they can open a chumash, a Torah book on their own, and read their own heritage and study their own heritage. We know that life is indeed rich with meaning and purpose, and we don't take our eyes off it. It's not only about what we need, the Alter Rebbe said to the Chassid. It's also about where we are needed. And with that, my friends, we can rejoice. We can rejoice in the knowledge that even if at times life is difficult, life is good. Life is a blessing. Life is worth celebrating. And even during those moments of pain and anguish, those moments of struggles and difficulties, we find the strength within our faith to muster the courage and continue the climb, because we know we can't quit, especially not now when there's so much to celebrate and so much more excitement to come. Back in 1990, when communism fell apart and Hungary gained independence from the Soviet Union, people suddenly had freedoms the likes of which they hadn't seen since 1956, when Russia invaded Hungary. For the first time in decades, people were able to make their own choices regarding the schooling of their children. And so, like everywhere, all over the former Soviet Union, Jewish schools sprang up overnight. One such school was opened in Budapest. A team of American teachers and rabbis came out to spearhead the effort to open a Jewish day school for the first time in decades. They placed ads in the paper that they were going to start the new school year off, and they were hoping to get 50 Jewish children to attend this new school. The first day of registration, 450 children and their parents showed up. Now you can imagine, you rent a facility that can hold 50, and now you have 450, you got a little bit of a problem. So they obviously call New York and say, we need reinforcements. We're going to need more teachers. We're going to need more money. We're going to need more funding. We're going to need more of everything. We got 450 kids registering on our first day of opening a Jewish school in Budapest. So that day they decided they're going to break up the families in groups and interview in smaller groups to get to know these families and why they're here and what their interests are. So in this one group, the rabbi that's there is saying to each one, I'd like you each to speak and tell me, why are you here? I mean, we're happy that you're here, but we want to understand why you're here. Is it because you're afraid of anti-Semitism in the public school? Is it because you want a Jewish education? What's the reason that brought so many people here? In one of these rooms, each one is getting a chance to speak, and one of the fellows is quiet. He's not joining in the discussion. And finally, the rabbi turns to him and says, is there any reason that you wish to share with the rest of us? He's a little bit embarrassed. He looks downward, and the man said, there is a reason. But it's very difficult for me to talk about it, but I'll try. He said he was a child of 7 years old when the Germans occupied Hungary in 1944. The Germans knew that the war was almost over for them, but in their very sick obsession to kill as many Jews as possible, they rounded up as many of us as they could and sent us to Auschwitz. All Hungarian Jews were terrified. One night, while lying in bed still in his home, he heard his parents arguing. He went downstairs. His parents were in a room. The door was closed, but he was able to look through the keyhole and see what was going on in the room. He said his father was very agitated. And he said to my mother, look, we have nothing to worry about. No one knows we're Jewish. No one in this town knows we're Jewish. We're safe. We don't look Jewish. We never did anything Jewish. We don't have any Jewish friends. There is no evidence that we have any Jewish identity. We'll survive. We'll be okay. To which my mother responded, but maybe they have a list somewhere. Maybe someone knows and will turn us in. To which my father said, look, even if they came to our house, we'll deny it. If they looked over our entire house, what would they find to connect us to the Jewish people? And at that point, he stopped talking mid-sentence. They both looked up at the bookcase, towards the highest shelf. My mother walked over to the shelf and took down a book. It was a siddur. It was a prayer book. It was the siddur that her mother had given her on the day of her wedding. The same prayer book that her mother's mother had given to her mother on the day she was married. My mother took the siddur from the shelf, took the prayer book, leafed through the pages, and tears began running down her cheeks. She turned to my father and looked at him, And I'm watching this through the keyhole, and my heart was pumping rapidly. She then looked at the burning fireplace and threw the prayer book into the fireplace. And as that siddur was consumed by flames, my mother fell to the floor in anguish. I ran upstairs. I threw myself on my bed and I cried like I never cried before. I cried for hours and hours. No, we had no Jewish friends. No, we never acted Jewish. We never observed anything Jewish. We never celebrated anything Jewish. And yet I knew in my heart that what I had just witnessed was an awful, terrible thing. I felt as if part of my soul had been ripped out of me. As if my family's journey had suddenly come to an end. And in all my years since, I have not been able to shake the pain that I witnessed on that night. In my mind, I still see those pages of that prayer book burning. And the tears just continue to roll down my face. So you ask me why I wish to send my child to this school? I'll tell you why. On the first day of school, I'm going to proudly walk into this building, holding my son's hand. I'm going to walk into the classroom with him. And then I'm going to hand him a siddur. I will hand him a prayer book. And my tears from that night will suddenly stop flowing. The tears of the Jew, the laughter of the Jew, they come hand in hand. There's a very special place in Israel that I speak about, a place very dear to my heart. It's the burial of Rachel in Beis Lachem in Bethlehem, matriarch of the Jewish people. Now, unlike Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and Sarah, and Rivka, and Leah, our matriarch Rachel is not buried in Hebron, in the cave of Machpelah. So if you go to Hebron and you go to the burial of Machpelah, you will find 3 of our fathers, 3 of our mothers there. The only one not buried there is Rachel. Rachel was buried some miles away in Beis Lachem. Why? Why is our Mama Rachel buried on a road? Why wasn't she buried next to her mother? Why wasn't she buried next to her parents? Why wasn't she buried together with the matriarchs and patriarchs of the Jewish people? Why in a separate grave on the road? And the answer to this question can be found in the book of Jeremiah. Jeremiah answers it for us. And he says, you see, our forefather Jacob envisioned the painful day that the children of Israel would be exiled from Jerusalem. And they would pass this road as they ran for their very lives. As they were being led in chains by the Babylonians, they passed this road. And there they would find comfort and hope by the graveside of Mama Rachel. Jacob put her here because he knew that one day in the future her children would need a place to find hope and to find comfort. When they were being dragged into exile or they were running for their very lives, this place would give them hope. This place would give them inspiration. And so she's buried on the road. Jeremiah says, Kol Birama Nishma, a voice is heard on high. Nehi Bechi Samrurim, lamentations, bitter weeping. Rachel Mevaka, Jeremiah says, your mother Rachel is crying. Mevaka al banel, she is crying for her children. Me'ano lehinochem, she refuses to be comforted. Al banel ki einena, for her children, for they are not secure. Up in heaven, Mama Rachel comes and she doesn't stop crying because she sees her children, her descendants are in trouble. They're in exile. They're in pain. And each and every time her children, the Jewish people, have suffered, have been tormented, have been persecuted, Mama Rachel cries. The Babylonian exile, the Roman exile, Mama Rachel cries bitter tears. The Spanish Inquisition, the pogroms, the expulsions. Mama Rachel cries again. Gott knew, she says, Dear God, meine Kinder, my children are suffering. The Nazis in the concentration camps and the gas chambers and communism and Stalin in Siberia, Mama Rachel was weeping, uncontrollable. Each and every terrorist attack in Israel, at each funeral of a soldier, of a child, of a mother murdered in our holy land, if you listen closely, you can hear the crying of our mother Rachel. Me'ana lihi nachem, she refuses to be comforted. We stand today 1 year exactly to the date of the murder of our colleagues, Rabbi Gabi and Rifki Holzberg, and the guests in the Mumbai Chabad house. Mama Rachel cried that day too. But then Jeremiah says, Meni kolech mi bechi, that God calls out to Rachel and tells her, it's time to stop, Rachel. Please, Mama Rachel, stop your voice from crying. God tells Rachel, remove the tears from your eyes, for they have already pierced through the heavens. And God gives his assurance to Rachel and says, Rachel, Moshiach is on its way. Vishavu vanim l'gvulam, your children, they're all coming home. They're coming home spiritually, and before long, every single one of them will be back home physically as well. From all the far-flung corners of the earth, they will come together to once and for all see that jigsaw puzzle of history completed. And they will understand all the difficult pieces along the way. Umacha Hashem Dima, God himself will wipe away Rachel's tears, along with the oceans of tears that our ancestors have shed. And the laughter of Rabbi Akiva and all the great martyrs of Israel will resonate in heaven and earth. My friends, that day is so close. We can taste it, we can smell it, we can feel it, we can even begin to see it. We don't understand God's ways. We cannot begin to understand why our people have had to take the journeys that we have, but we do know that our ancestors have weathered those journeys with unbelievable faith, love, and devotion. And we, my friends, we, this generation, we are blessed that our part of our journey is to rebuild. After so much devastation and destruction, we, our generation, you and me, are the contractors of Jewish history. We are the fortunate generation of history, for our job is to sanctify God in times of freedom and plenty. Perhaps, the most critical part of our journey. And in conclusion, this is what we plan on doing right here. We have a piece of land sitting right here in the back lot of our Chabad Center where we plan to build. We dig our shovels into this earth and we say boldly and proudly, we will build. We will continue building Jewish community after Jewish community for our generation, for all future generations. I shared this once at a high holiday service. I'll share it again in conclusion to tonight's lecture. We held a groundbreaking ceremony here in this back lot 2 years ago. And in the weeks and days leading up to this groundbreaking, my father called me from New York on several occasions. And he asked me for a special favor. Being that he wasn't going to be here for the actual event, can I please have someone stand in for him? If I would give someone the assignment of taking a shovel in hand, digging up some dirt, and saying, this is in honor of Rabbi Mordechai Meir HaKohen Bryski. I said, sure, not a problem. It's midnight, Saturday night, the night before the groundbreaking. Now, midnight by us is 3 a.m. in New York. My father calls me. And you get nervous when the phone rings that late. Moshe, do you remember that tomorrow by the groundbreaking, have someone dig up some dirt in my honor? Yeah. No problem. Came Sunday, immediately after the event, my father called with anxious and excited anticipation. How did the event go? Was it a nice crowd? Was it a nice show? And by the way, did you have someone dig up some dirt for me and have me mine? I said, yeah, I did it. As it turns out, this groundbreaking was right before Rosh Hashanah. My parents made a change in their plans and decided to join us for Yom Kippur. So a few days after the groundbreaking, my parents end up coming to Southern California to spend Yom Kippur with us here in the Gura Hills. I'm coming back from the airport and my father says, Zogmir, there's still some earth back there. I said, yeah. He says, you still have the shovel? Yeah. Could we go there? Sure. So we go literally straight from the airport to the back lot here. We even still had some hard hats. I put some hard hats on my parents, my father and mother, gave them shovels. And it was just this beautiful scene of watching them dig some dirt up with the shovel. I called someone to take a picture, just this beautiful snapshot. And I thought about this quite a bit. Why was it so important to my father to be a part of laying the groundwork for our new community campus of the Conejo Valley? But my father's not into photo ops. Why is it that he goes around to friends and acquaintances in New York trying to raise money for this project 3,000 miles away? My father's not a fundraiser. And then it became so obvious to me. You see, after having been through what he's been through in life, after having seen what he's seen, after having lost what he's lost, he now sees his journey come full circle. The shtetl of Chmelnik, from where he comes from, had once been bursting with the energy of Yiddishkeit, of Judaism. Its streets had once been alive on Friday afternoons with the hustle and bustle of a Jewish community getting ready for Shabbos. The Cheder had once been echoing with the words of Chumash and Talmud. And the Grand Synagogue had once been a majestic edifice, radiating holiness and spirituality. So many lives. So many wonderful, precious lives. Torn, destroyed, taken away. So many tears. After having been a part of the journey of destruction, my father sees the awesome hand of Jewish destiny beckoning him to be a part of the journey of renewing and of rebuilding. Building for his children, for his grandchildren, for his great-grandchildren. But even more so, building for your children, for your grandchildren, and your great-grandchildren. As Jews, we never forget. We never stop crying over what we've lost. But at the same time, we never stop journeying onward. We go on building bigger and stronger, better and brighter. And we never, ever stop the laughter. We never stop the dancing. And we keep on rejoicing. Thank you very much for joining me.